So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to join us for this very important, very timely talk provided by Dr. Mekha Srivastava. She will be discussing how the geopolitical and geoeconomic statecraft have shaped or altered the industrial policy dynamics in the context of U.S.-China chip wars, technology competition. So, Mekha, maybe you can start. Yes.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Joyce, for providing me this platform. Today, I'll be presenting my research on China's semiconductor conundrum and understand the US foreign policy towards China in the last almost 10 decades during Biden administration and Trump's first administration. And I'll be looking at the efficacy of such policies towards China and how this has impacted China's semiconductor growth. So I'll be sharing my screen, yes, share my presentation with you. Joyce, could you please confirm if that is visible? Okay, I'll assume it's moving. Can you hear me? Okay, sure.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So the title of my presentation is China's Semiconductor Conundrum, Understanding US Export Controls and Their Efficacy. First, I will introduce the background of the research, the topic, and contextualize it. Before we move on, it's important to understand how the industry itself and supply chain works. However, in the last forum, one speakers briefly pointed out at the supply chain, but I will repeat it to let the audience understand if in case they do not know about the basics of the semiconductor supply chain. There are three stages of making chips. First, it is designed. Second, then it goes to fabrication, and then it goes for assembly, testing, and packaging. There are a few firms dealing with all three stages. Those are called integrated device manufacturers. There are other choke point technologies required at each of these stages. For example, IP, and EDS softwares are required at the design stage. Several manufacturing equipments, also chemical wafers, are required at the fabrication stage. Equipments and chemical wafers are also required at the assembly, testing, and packaging. So this shows that the semiconductor supply chain itself remains highly complicated and yet fragmented, because no one country has been able to achieve dominance in all of these technologies, and they're dependent on the supply of these materials on one another. There are a bunch of countries which are involved in the supply chain. There is US in the design segment, Taiwan is there in fabrication. Japan controls most of the chemicals and gases and wafers. The manufacturing of the higher end tech is controlled by this British company called ASML. Most of testing facilities are located in China and also other countries. So these are only major players in the supply chain. Getting deeper into the supply chain, looking at the choke point technologies and what all products are required in the supply chain. Looking at the IC and device components, semiconductor production would require diodes, transistors, light emitting diodes, mounted piezoelectric crystals, assembled or unassembled modules and panels. In the software and IP domain, EDA, that is electronic design automated, and RSIC 5, these are structures, these are architectures required for designing chips. When it comes to manufacturing equipment, there are two kinds of photolithography equipments, that is deep ultraviolet lithography and extreme ultraviolet machines that are required to print those chips. There are etching machines and ion injectors also required in printing chips. Machines, these are machines that are used to manufacture semiconductor ingots and wafers, electronic integrated circuits, and flat panel displays. When it comes to raw material, companies, fabrication companies need printed circuit boards, wafer materials, photoresist materials, and electronic gases. These could be silicon, germanium, gallium, etc. Nitrogen and other gases are also required. It was important to get this background, as I will be using these terms like UV, DUV, EDA, design, and materials and gases in my presentation ahead. Looking at how I located this research in the contemporary context, is that the supply chain, as we have seen, it is extremely complicated and fragmented, as I mentioned earlier, and dominance of certain countries in the upstream has traditionally has enabled the US to securitize this technology. We have seen similar kind of export controls that are being put on China. Today, we have seen it on Japan in the 1980s. However, there's a different context to export controls on both countries. Yet, securitization of semiconductor technology has benefited the US in the past, and this geoeconomic strategy is being re-executed against China in recent times. In recent years, such securitization measures, these are leading to wider impact on deepening the global power rivalry on technology between the US and China. So this also comes as a result of the massive progress that China has made in the semiconductor and overall AI technology space, and which directly poses threat to America's economic and military superiority. And that is why more and more sanctions are coming up to derail China's AI growth. These are the contents of my presentation and how I have designed my research to present today. First, main aim is to understand America's tech policy towards China in the last two presidencies, as I mentioned earlier. First, I will look at the industrial policies and export control used by Trump 1.0, and then the Biden administration. The key aspects that I examine in this presentation is that factors that led to the shift in the global power rivalry towards the chip domain, and second, how US policy has evolved from trade war to a chip war. I focus on understanding the logic of America's choke point strategy and questions the effectiveness of such strategy. Main query of this research is how effective are US chip regulations, how effective they have been in blocking China's AI growth. This leads us to explaining why China is continuously able to produce technological breakthroughs despite US sanctions. I have used primary source for referring to most of the materials that I've used in my presentation. That includes US Congress documents, presidential orders, and guidelines issued by Bureau of Industrial and Security, US Commerce Department, and official reports produced by Chinese government. Starting to look at China's, US foreign policy towards China under the Trump administration. Before 2020 elections, Trump administration released a volume that was titled Trump on China, Putting America's First. This summarized the kind of outlook that Trump administration has had against China. It framed China as a threat and revisionist power. Also, there's another report that is United States Trade Representative 2017 report that earlier also highlighted how China's policies and its inroads in the US is threatening US jobs, and various such reports and policy stands about China's rapidly growing footprints in the United States, in terms of business, in terms of students coming to American universities, etc. Through all these policies, they developed a direct confrontation. This confrontational approach, as you can see in the infographic, it can be divided in four. First, building a larger narrative that China is a strategic threat to the existence of American hegemony in economy and military both domains. Second, a series of trade tariffs were imposed on China, and back then we used to particularly call it trade war. And various Chinese companies were also included in the entity list. This list is prepared by the US Department of Commerce, which requires certain companies which are listed. If American companies want to trade with these countries, they need to acquire certain license from the US government to trade. So ultimately, the companies that comes under the entity list, they are restricted from doing business with American companies. Also, through its Indo-Pacific strategy, Trump's foreign policy also started engaging with allies more and more. For example, Quad, or its Indo-Pacific strategy, through which it started aligning with the players in the global in the semiconductor supply chain to collectively sanction China's tech footprints. Looking at its policy during Biden administration, it can be seen that during Biden, direct focus was put on the semiconductor value chain, as Biden identified it as China's weak spot, leading to all AI growth. Various speeches given by Biden and also Jake Sullivan, it directly aimed at or directly mentioned that America needs to maintain maximum lead against China in emerging and foundational technologies that includes microelectronics and AI. So a lot of sanctions were narrowed down to this particular domain, a semiconductor, and that intensified curbs on China's AI and military modernization. So there are three facets of such a policy towards China. That first, to compete more and more, compete as in this is a phrase that is used in official documents by the US, that is keeping away versus running faster. That is stopping them from assessing certain chips and then running faster by employing or deepening domestic industrial policy. For example, Biden administration passed a Chips and Science Act in 2021. Second, to cooperate with allies. For example, Chip 4 Alliance was formulated and strengthened during Biden to ensure that sanctions are implemented with the help of the allies and other actors in the supply chain. Third, constraining the growth of China's semiconductor industry in the higher end domain, that is small yard, high fence strategy, that is keeping the area of restriction small, that is 7 nanometer and below threshold, and keeping it high. So this kind of strategy was adopted by Biden administration, which is more particularly called tech war. I will have to exit the full screen mode to zoom in into the details of these restrictive policies imposed by both Biden administration and Trump administration. This widely started around 2016. In the second column, I have mentioned the nature of the restriction and the third kind of restriction. So in 2016, ZTE was added to the list and imposed a license regime on American companies to trade with Chinese vendors. In 2018, trade tariffs were imposed. US imposed around 25% tariff on 50 billion USD of Chinese goods, and followed by an additional of 10%. In 2019, in the form of sanctions, Huawei was included in the entity list. In 2020, foreign direct product rule was imposed on Huawei and ZTE. Basically, FDP rule is something that ensures that any technology that is produced by American and is used by other partners or allies of America, it cannot be transported or further exported without license and permission from the United States. Basically, if a design has been produced on American soil or by American companies, it cannot be used by, for example, Taiwanese companies to use it in their technology and then export it to the US. So this further gives a weight to the sanctions and the involvement of allies in the export control policies. In November 2020, a presidential order addressed that the threat from securities and investments lies in to finance Chinese Communist Party military companies, and that needs to be restricted. In December 2020, another executive order banned American investments in China's SMIC. This later part of the list mentions some measures taken during Biden administration. In October 2020, major export control policy was introduced by BIS, under which the export of 7 nm below chips was banned for sale from American companies to the Chinese companies. In December same year, the US also banned 35 Chinese chip companies that include YMTC. In January 2023, they came in agreement with Japan and Netherlands, further solidifying their alliance. In August 2023, through an US presidential executive order, they included a mandatory screening of the US outbound investments to China, including the microelectronics sector. In October 2023, the previous rules which were introduced in October 2022, they were revised and they included certain GPUs, basically strengthening the previous export controls, recognizing that the earlier policies have failed and they have had loopholes. Same year also, there were wider debates in the policy circles, whether there's a need to ban the open source set architectures, for example, RSIC. In January 2024, US presidential order before Biden administration ceased to exist. The proposed rules restricted American cloud companies from allowing Chinese AI developers to use their platforms. Also, in the same month, the AI diffusion rule was laid down by the Biden administration. However, during Trump 2.0, it has been taken down and new AI diffusion policy has been introduced now. However, I do not cover the 2.0 part in my research today. Also, if we look at the comparison between the Trump administration and the Biden administration when it comes to bringing Chinese companies in the entity list, there is a huge jump during the Biden administration. That's why I emphasize that how this has grown or evolved from trade war to tech war, as Trump widely focused on a China containment strategy in a comprehensive way, but Biden has narrowed it down to the semiconductor industry. As we can see, the total number of entity listed companies in 2020, they were 183, only grew by around 40 number, that is from 141 to 183. However, by the end of 2022, that is within 2 years, these were more than doubled, came to around 425 companies. So in 2022, around 425 Chinese companies were blacklisted by US government to trade with American companies. I'll get back to the previous format. Yes. So another feature of Biden administration's policy towards China is its choke point strategy. The main aim is to restrict policies which are. I'm sorry, Joyce. Is there a disturbance? Do you want to say something?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So as a part of this choke point strategy, the Biden administration aimed at targeting those spots in the supply chain which are crucial for Chinese companies to acquire and manufacture technologies on their own, basically to derail their indigenous development drive. That is the first stage of such strategy is to ban the transfer of US-made advanced chips that they did through their export control policy. Second, to invoke FDP rule, which I mentioned earlier, and block the supply of the IP and equipment via other countries, which the US government tried to do by implementing its Chip 4 alliance. Third is to influence allies and block other sources through which China could lead its indigenous development program, for example, open access architectures. Fourth is to block access to US cloud companies and China's AI modeling. However, the third and fourth are still under process. It is also important to look at how such developments, how a greater emphasis on the semiconductor industry in the Great Power Rivalry. It also includes other angles on, and it also has diverse motivations to drive America's foreign policy towards China. And one of the important factors, needless to say, is Taiwan. So Taiwan is an important influential factor for such underpinnings, given that there are more aggressive narratives domestically in China regarding its reunification with Taiwan, mentioned various times in Xi Jinping's speeches. Also, its 14th five-year plan in 2022. CPC's paramount leader, she also stated that China would never renounce use of force to reunify Taiwan, and its military has been ordered to comprehensively enhance military training and preparation for war. This is a looming threat on invasion of the island, which is crucial in the supply chain, and US larger national security itself needs to ensure that the cruciality of Taiwan in the supply chain remains in its interest. So here the securitization also brings Taiwan's factor here, because US views Taiwan's relationship with China as a security risk for itself. And especially concerning the control of critical technologies, US is concerned about the potential for its technology, especially its F-35 aircraft, as needless to say, every other equipment from small ones to military technology, everything includes semiconductors. So it is crucial, not only from the economic viewpoint, but also from the military modernization viewpoint. So it fears that if that falls into Chinese hands, if China were to invade Taiwan. So as a result, US foreign policy is also driven towards Taiwan in a certain fashion that includes deepening its relations and engagement with Taiwan when it comes to semiconductor industry. There's a larger democracy chips narrative that has been brought out in Taiwan, especially by DPP, that aims at aligning with other democracies to produce chips to diversify its own supply chain. Second, this Taipei Act of 2019 was was introduced during Trump administration itself, that focused on strengthening its relations with Taiwan. Also, anti-Huawei policies were introduced, and Taiwan was pressurized to derail its engagements with the Chinese companies like Huawei. Such industrial policies also includes pressurizing Taiwan to reshore its chip investments in other countries, most importantly on US soil, and that also in the higher end segments. That started during the Trump administration itself, which pressurized TSMC to build facilities in the United States. The Arizona factory started building up at this time, and the industrial policy also introduced important incentives, especially to Taiwanese companies to reshore their facilities on American soil. It is also to look at China's position in the supply chain if we need to understand that how both US and China are dependent on Taiwan. So it's important to look at where does China stand in this global supply chain. When it comes to design, I'm not able to see the potential of Chinese companies remains very much limited. There are a handful of companies, for example, Huawei's high silicon division. Otherwise, most of its production, it is mainly dependent on foreign players, also American firms for the design segment. When it comes to fabrication, there is again a limited potential. However, there are some big enterprises which are huge huge players in the fabrication market. That includes SMIC and Huawei. In the minerals and materials segment, they produce there's a good position that Chinese companies and China itself hold when it comes to critical minerals. They produce 90% of gallium, 60% of germanium, and 64% of silicon. All these are very important elements used in the supply chain. I also mentioned these terms in my initial slides. So US, we can say, is rather dependent on China at this particular part of the supply chain. When it comes to manufacturing equipment, the domestic players in China are NARA and AMEC. It has around only 2% of global market share, and it is largely dependent on the foreign players for advanced sets of manufacturing equipment. When it comes to assembly, testing, and packaging, again, it has a good share that is around 20% of the global market share. There are some big domestic players like Jiangsu, Zhangjiang, and Jianhui Huatin, and foreign players are dependent on China at this segment of the supply chain. If you look at the top global companies in the semiconductor industry, in all the three segments, design, fabrication, and assembly, testing, and packaging. On the far left of the screen, there are certain companies listed, which are the top semiconductor companies in the global supply chain. And then the location. We can see that China is dominant in the ATP segment, that is 3 of the companies are Chinese companies, and in the fabrication, 2 companies from China are in the top 7. It's also important to look at how China has responded to such policies, which I have stated earlier, that were adopted during Trump 1.0 and the Biden administration. So these policies, broadly to sum up, these are defensive and also constructive, not offensive, not very offensive. These are largely aimed at de-Americanization, and the state funding, as we can see, has been strengthened in all streams in the post-ban phase. So in the post-ban phase, that is after 2022, there is a renewed synergy when it comes to achieving the goal of indigenization of supply chain and gaining self-reliance and building its own strength in the supply chain, especially in segments wherein China lagged earlier. That includes manufacturing and manufacturing equipment materials. So there are a lot of reshoring efforts that has been accelerated in the post-chip ban phase, particularly the large state-owned enterprises. They have reshored more swiftly, and not only state-owned but also privately owned enterprises in China, which have reshored more swiftly and effectively. And state sponsorship and their economic coordination has played a very important role. A more strategic and coordinated synergy is also seen among China's chip makers, that is between private companies and between state and domestic chip makers also. However, there are a certain downside of the excessive synergy in terms of free flow of funds in the domestic chip industry. So now the growth instead of being market driven, it is more excessively relying on the state sponsored model. So startups in China's semiconductor industry are less driven by market, but more driven by how states want um, its agenda to be set with the help of the private enterprises, and they are largely dependent on this state funds. The shortage of chips in China's semiconductor market has also resulted in hoarding, corruption, and black marketing. There are various startups which were opened in 2020, 2021 with the help of huge state funding. However, they have been declared bankrupted within 1 to 2 years. There's a sign of weak developmental state also, which we can see in China's domestic semiconductor policies. This is a graph that largely shows that how companies and their revenues and their engagements with China in the post-ban phase looks like. This tells us whether US's foreign policy, US's tech policy or export controls against China, it has actually impacted the output being exported to China or not. So I have taken the figures and the revenue shares of top two companies, that is ASML. It is an equipment seller from Netherlands, and Taiwan's TSMC. If we look at the period from 2022 to 2024, ASML's China share have consistently risen even in the post-ban phase. Also, if we look at ASML's total revenue, it has not been able to maintain the same pace. However, there's a marginal growth despite US sanctions. If we look at TSMC, the immediate effect of the ban within the year 2020 has seen declining revenues of TSMC. However, it has grown in the year 2023, which tells us that after a period of time, TSMC's revenue remained unaffected. TSMC's revenue from China remained unaffected despite US sanctions. In fact, its revised sanctions were in place. When it comes to its share from China, it has, however, fallen in the post 2023. So the rise that I indicated earlier is mostly attributed to the overall rise in the demand because of generative AI technologies, and more demand is there in the market today when it comes to higher end GPUs, which TSMC is a large seller of. Looking at the chronology of China's responses starting from 2019 to 2023, we can say that in its drive to indigenize supply chains, in 2019 they introduced the second phase of the big fund. It is a huge fund that includes contributions of different stakeholders that includes state-owned banks, state-owned enterprises, private companies pooling their money together. to fund startups in China's semiconductor industry. So second phase was introduced in 2019. Another phase, that is 3.0, was introduced last year in May. Both these funding rounds have emphasized more and more on funding domestic startups, especially in choke point technologies that includes design and equipment. In 2020 itself, Huawei introduced its Tashan project that aimed at producing technologies that are devoid of US technologies and its source codes. In 2020, also China achieved certain breakthroughs in lithography machines. They were able to develop indigenously made 28 nm lithography machines. In 2023, as a slight reaction to US chip controls, China blocked US chip maker Micron to do business in China. In 2023, it banned the export of germanium and gallium. I mentioned earlier that how China commands a dominant position in this segment of the supply chain. In 2023, its antitrust authorities have blocked corporate mergers with US chip makers. So this is some kind of retaliatory position that China has taken so far in the tech war. However, we also need to examine whether such policies have actually affected the growth of China's semiconductor industry, or rather it has accelerated such initiatives taken by Chinese government. I argue that such policies, the US export controls, have largely failed to be effective as the US government thought it to be. So there are limitations and there are drawbacks of such policies, and there are 4 key explanations of why such policies have failed to bring results as expected. First is the existence and the emergence of shell companies. These companies were created in the post-ban phase, or even during or even before the post-ban phase, mainly because China had time to buy in the phase that in the post-Huawei ban phase to export controls, that is 2022 when they were implemented. So this is the time where China, and quite to an extent, anticipated that in future US might restrict the transfer of such technologies from American companies to Chinese companies. And a lot of preparations, we can say, were made, and shell companies emerged as a result of it. As soon as export controls were implemented and a lot of companies were blacklisted by US, shell companies emerged as an alternative. They traded with American companies and transported technologies to domestic chip makers. Second, one of the largest drawbacks of limiting transfer of technology is that it provides incentive to the other player to replace that particular technology with another technology, and China has had its experience by doing this through clandestine ways. So it has been able to replace certain kind of technology or certain nanometer scale equipment or chips by another which is able to do a task to a similar task. Third, there are loopholes in existing policies which through which chip makers, American chip makers especially, have been able to circumvent these loopholes and produce chips that were ultimately serving the needs of China's semiconductor companies. For example, NVIDIA came up with its H20 chips, which were ultimately sold to Chinese chip makers through other means, despite being under restrictions. Also, as in the previous slide, I gave the presented the graph showing the examples of ASML and TSMC, that how their revenues were not affected to a great extent despite US sanctions. So this plan on involving allies and then ultimately breaking the bone of China's semiconductor industry, it failed. Because despite the implementation of the FTP rule, actors and players like ASML and TSMC and even NVIDIA were able to do business with Chinese companies. Looking at how this policy scenario must have had implications for China, its domestic drive to grow in indigenous supply, in building indigenous supply chain and a wider global world order, we can say that China's focus tends to remain on segments that threaten its long-term growth in the value chain. So this has accentuated in the post-ban phase as they have focused more and more on building indigenous capability in segments that strengthen China's current position in the value chain. Huawei has emerged as an example to grow consistently and being able to innovate and to circumvent around the sanctions. And also there's a huge jump in Huawei's revenue despite it has been blacklisted by US companies for a long time now. So Huawei's innovation potential, we can say it remains irresistible, and it demonstrates that how China's partial success in innovation has picked up despite Western sanctions. China's overall technology dependence, including chip hardware, is set to advance its capability in the next generation generative AI technologies. That also is driven by open source. So there are various Chinese companies, for example, Alibaba's Qwen, DeepSeek's rise is one of the most important examples that we need to see, that how despite sanctions, China has been able to come up with and compete with American companies in the generative AI technologies and the LLM models, that also by using open source technologies, which the US has failed to do so. The failure of export control also provides value to China's dual circulation strategy and reinforce its efforts to build its presence and influence global South countries. The export of open source technology in LLM and generative AI is again yet another example to see that how China could gain much deeper influence in the global South countries at the cost of Western players in the supply chain. There are also new players emerging as a result of this new churning in the global supply chain. We see that players like India, Malaysia, Vietnam are new players in the global supply chain. They have accelerated domestic measures, industrial policies to be more visible and to invite foreign investments and to emerge as important players in the supply chain. So they are pursuing strategic autonomy in sensitive technologies that could lead to further fragmentation of supply chain, which is again counter to US-led technological order. So this shift highlights that there is limit to economic statecraft, the larger policy that US has aimed at pursuing, and that ultimately could counter the leverage that the US seeks to achieve. The conclusions of my study says that Washington's policies during the Trump 1.0 and the Biden administration, they aimed at containing China's technological rise, but they have failed to achieve its objectives in both long-term and short-term. In short term, they have been able to affect the growth and the revenues of certain firms. That shows that there might be the transfer of technologies to certain Chinese companies might have faced setbacks for a short term. However, they have picked up in recent years, which shows that in the long term, it might not be effective. It has triggered the indigenization drive of China's chip sector, definitely because we have seen the rise of in funding in Big Fund 2.0 and 3.0, which almost comes equivalent to US's Chips and Science Act that provides around $52 billion for domestic production, and China's 3.0 Big Fund 3.0 provides around $48 billion. So it says that China is now aiming to even catch up when it comes to providing incentives to its domestic chip players, which otherwise would not have occurred at the same timeline. So it has its domestic drive has picked up certainly in the post-ban phase. During the Trump administration itself, the Chinese semiconductor industry has got time to manage its domestic chip ecosystem to calibrate with the anticipated restrictions. The growing synergies can be observed today more between the they have been developed in the domestic market in anticipation of future bans by the US, as I stated earlier. Washington's choke point strategy is also can also be termed as it's not a panacea in the long term as well. It has encouraged Chinese government to take a U-turn from the 2020 crackdown that it implemented, that it redrawn its support for the private enterprises in the post-ban phase, and it has enabled access to certain equipments and forced Chinese manufacturers to strengthen their all of society approach towards re-engineering, remodeling, and even innovation. Thank you for your attention, everyone. I would welcome if there are any questions related to the subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mecca. It's very informative, and you have done solid research, and your analysis is very sharp. I believe maybe you can stop sharing so that we can see the audience. Maybe people would like to discuss with you, or yeah. Anyone who wants to maybe ask questions or share thoughts? I do have a few questions or curiosities. Maybe Mecca, you can start with this question so that other people can try to sort out their questions in mind. Let me see. This checkpoint strategy, okay, you analyze, it's very clear. I think there are also books on this issue, checkpoints, okay, specifically about this economic war in between US and China or Russia or Iran, and in different forms, of course, the oil, but now primarily it's chips, okay. But also, as you said, this supply chain is very complicated, especially involving shell companies, okay, fragmented sectors that's not really surfaced as one major company, but there are many other shell companies, okay. Not to mention that the close tie, actually only a few years, maybe a year back, I think, between TSMC and China, maybe Huawei and other, okay, and also NVIDIA till now, okay, maybe also in the future. So it seems that the growth of this state-supported industry in China to produce its so-called indigenous chips, okay, for advanced chips is unstoppable, along with this unstoppable rise of China. I'm more curious about what would be the major category according to your observation, okay, that China is most keen to obtaining or to fostering, okay, in its local manufacturing and so on. Not just this Alibaba or this platform trade, but I would assume, especially according to the statecraft, according to national security, the militarized function or generative AI in terms of military function, or this surveillance system, it's very fast. Okay, it's not only this digital ID, but biometric sensor or facial or iris sensor and so on. So what do you think? I mean, not what do you think? What have you observed the growth or the development of the top need in China in terms of this homegrown, home produced advanced chips? Yeah, that's my curiosity. What can you address that?
I think you are spot on when it comes to identifying that how China is aiming at certain sectors and certain segments to accelerate its growth in the industry. I think
And
local.
also the connections. Supply chain, for example, with China, I don't know, with Taiwan, even though SCMC claimed that they have stopped providing them some basic chips, but I don't know whether there are other connections. Okay, they still can manage to do that. But also NVIDIA is also very closely tied with China. Yeah. So such, in addition to shell company, okay, these big companies, they still have their connections. And what would be the most needed types of chips according to your observation?
Yeah. Okay. So resuming from where I left off, I think one of the most important role that is played in recent times in China's semiconductor industry and its growth model is that the role of local and provincial government remains very important. There's an intense subsidy competition when it comes to letting startups grow. And when it comes to providing subsidies, it goes very fast, as in almost every startup is able to acquire such subsidies. However, the focus is more on helping the companies grow, which are either in the equipment manufacturing sector or in the high-end manufacturing. So because US has imposed restrictions for on a certain threshold, that is 7 nm and below. In 2023, China came up with this its Huawei Mate Pro phone that has a 7 nm technology, and that created headlines everywhere that how China was able to come up with this technology despite those sanctions. So such attention Chinese state would like to grab, also to to simulate the kind of legitimacy that the party always seek from its own people, that it has the strength to stand tall against Western hegemonic pressure and Western sanctions. So one that they are targeting is the high-end semiconductor production, that is 7 nm and below. So according to reports, I don't know how far those are true to what they say, but yeah, there are measures and there are policies going on to support even 5 nanometer scale. And Also, there are certain firms which are being funded heavily to produce equipment for manufacturing, especially building capabilities in the extreme ultraviolet photolithographic machines.
Yeah.
So yes, so these are the two key choke points that China has been extremely vulnerable of.
Yeah.
And this is what they want to show, that they are not vulnerable in the supply chain when it comes to if they face such sanctions in future again. So they are preparing certainly themselves in a manner that make them enable to circumvent any kind of sanctions that comes in future. One part is that. Also, when it comes to connections, domestic connections, I think companies like Huawei has played a very important role. There is this investment vehicle that's called Hubble, which Huawei runs, and it invests and it enables multiple enterprises in the domestic chip industry to come together, and it funds various enterprises to build a certain tech. So this kind of domestic synergy among chip makers has been ramped up and has been accelerated in response to US pressure. I'm not much aware about how it has implications for China's drive towards strengthening its surveillance capabilities. But yet again, I believe that if there's a drive to strengthen its capabilities in indigenization, or indigenization in the supply chain, it will ultimately strengthen its surveillance capabilities in the long term. When it comes to circumventing or its connections in other countries, I think other than NVIDIA, there is AMD, which is again American chip maker and supplier, which has come up with its alternate chips to those which are put under the threshold of sanctions. So both NVIDIA and AMD have been supplying chips to China, which have been enabling Chinese companies to run their business despite the sanctions. So
Yeah.
These dynamics also becomes more interesting during the Trump 2.0 as this policy has been relaxed relatively as of now, because I guess in the last month itself, Trump has allowed these companies to sell these downgraded chips to the China market. So currently the American administration is more inward looking, as in it's not focusing on directly derailing China's growth, but focusing more on building domestic capabilities. So I would say temporarily Chinese market is feel more breathable at this moment, and they are taking the best advantage of it to acquire more and more advanced chip, if there's again broader China containment strategy that comes again in future.
Yeah, right. So so the sanction or the checkpoint policies don't really are not really able to contain the rise or the drive of China, right? Especially now Trump's attitude seems to be very ambivalent, right? Yeah. So if China can gain some more time, it will achieve whatever it wants. Okay, by and by. So are there other questions from the audience, Doma or Pranab or other audience here? It's a rare opportunity for us to really discuss this issue.
Hi, Megha. Yeah, excellent presentations. I might have some view because you have concluded that the sanction has failed. But the US goal is to, of course, they cannot freeze the China progress indefinitely, right? Their objective is to delay the Chinese, the capacity, the rapid expansions of its own capacity in manufacturing chips. Their objective is to delay rather than completely, freeze there. So in that case, because of the sanction, China still lacked access to many technology where it cannot mass-produce chips that is below 7 nm, right? In that case, how can you conclude that it had failed? Because aim is to delay the progress, then so in that case, not being able to have the access to some of the most advanced technology, it is somewhat successful, and it's also pushing its allied, U.S. allies to restrict the technology transfer, right? So my question is like this. So how can you just come up with the completely failure, come as a complete failure? So my second question is maybe related to company like NVIDIA, right? It's pronounced. So it has been in Taiwan. There is some. He has been traveling to China and then to Taiwan frequently. So he is friendly with both. There's I guess some kind of humor about like the CEO, how he's very friendly to both, but at the same time, he is also a US company. So how does this kind of sanctions affect that kind of company? It's a one company. There are other global companies that are equally dependent on the US and China. Yeah, maybe these two questions.
Thank you, Rulma, for rather provocating questions. But yeah, I'm very happy to try to answer those questions. First, my conclusion that it has largely failed. However, I would not shy away from saying that there are major frictions that the Chinese semiconductor industry has faced in the wake of such sanctions. Firstly, that has hit China's chip giants, especially SMIC. Their revenues came down, their market values came down in the initial phase. SMIC itself has lost lots of its revenue in the year 2023. However, the reason that I conclude that it has failed because domestic capabilities to counter such sanctions have at least appeared to emerge more aggressively as they were in the pre-chip ban phase. Because if we see the capability of Chinese companies to produce at scale, Huawei's Mate 63 Pro, Mate 60 Pro itself sold around 30 billion handsets within a period of 6 months. So I understand that there are limitations on Chinese companies when it comes to producing technologies at scale, especially in the wake of US sanctions. However, there are certain companies, for example, Huawei, which have been able to face this heat despite they have delivered results. And also, when it comes to the impact of these sanctions, it comes mostly on the major or the bigger enterprises which are actually dealing with the high-end chips. So not all chips are produced by, or fall under the 7 nm and below category, because most chips that we are using, for example, in washing machine or microwave and others, these are legacy chips only, and they have not impact. The sanctions have remained unaffected. They have not been able to affect the market share or valuation or market share revenues of the companies which were dealing in the legacy chips. However, the more and more synergies that we saw in the post-ban phase, they have benefited all all players in the semiconductors equally. The focus is on building 7 nm and below chips. However, the larger synergy has helped to accelerate the overall capabilities in the entire semiconductor industry, and that is why I say that instead of derailing the growth, the momentum in the domestic industry has gone up. When it comes to the companies in the US, they are largely dependent not on only American companies like Nvidia, to which China is one of the most important and biggest market for Nvidia to sell its chips. Majority of its revenue comes from China. Also AMD. Not only these companies, but also Taiwanese companies like TSMC and others. Also Japanese companies, South Korean companies are heavily dependent on the Chinese market for their primary sales. So in the wake of these sanctions, initially they have negatively hit all of these companies, their market valuation, their stock listings, and their overall revenue share. Not only their overall, but their revenue share coming only from China. So initially, all of them have faced setbacks. However, because they were able to circumvent around the policy loopholes and they were able to take advantage of these loopholes, their revenue share has gained. Especially Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, as you mentioned, that he has been frequently visiting China and Taiwan and the US, and they have been able to navigate. Also, I would say in the present government, in the 2.0, there's intense lobbying being run by these tech CEOs, especially the hardware segment, that is Nvidia and AMD. They have more room to argue with the government that how the sanctions have not been working and how they should adopt and focus on other alternative measures to contain the rise of China in the chip and the AI sector, rather than cutting the market access for American companies, which is largely harming the American interest when it comes to their revenue interest. So yes, I would say that most business people and CEOs would think from the business viewpoint, because they want to make money. They have less to do with the geopolitical, angles, and more to do with making money from China, and this is the biggest market for them. So yes, they have been playing sometimes mediating role when the government is harsh. For example, it was during the Biden administration, but when the stand has relatively softened during Trump administration, because it is also trying to come at truce with China when it comes to trading, because there was a truce in June, and putting the sanctions at bay for a temporary period. So at this period, these companies are trying their best to argue with the government and to highlight how the sanctions are not in the best interest of the US. So yes, this has largely been the standpoint from the business standpoint. Are there any other questions? You're muted.
I tend to say, do you have any prediction? for this Trump 2.0, but also Xi eternity. So this relations. I mean, some people would assume that if this economic war can play well, then perhaps we can avoid physical war, but it doesn't seem like it because it's goes hand in hand. I mean, not to mention this tech war. People can maybe navigate, but the real intention, for example, Trump, or Xi Jinping, or Modi, okay, they want to maintain their the capacity or national power by continuing this development, technological development. But I'm most curious about this very rapid growth of or development of this generative AI. Of course, it's still enabled by the most advanced chips, right? And in the still, I'm more concerned and also more eager to know the advancement of this militarized, weaponized AI devices, okay, to achieve this on the one hand, securitization and surveillance of the entire state, but also neighboring state, and making profit from other states to purchase their equipment. Okay. But also this development of military devices through either AI or other chips. So there's two. Okay, one is military advancement. The other is control and securitization. So it seems that it's non-stoppable. Or what do you think?
When it comes to predictions, I think it's very difficult times for us to, predict when the American administration is very, it keep on confusing people with their own predictions. So I think I would say that when it comes to using economic coercion or whether it has the ability to actually prevent physical wars, I would say that countries would continue to hedge risk. That the US at least would keep on trying because be it Taiwan or China, or on the question of Taiwan, I think hedging risk by way of reshaping industrial policy is more of a trend, at least seen in recent years. Okay. And I see the possibility of that going deeper in at least near future. I wouldn't say or predict anything down the line, maybe 10 years later, when the equations, military equations, or the geopolitical tensions changes entirely. But yes, that's the thing. Also, when it comes to the use of military devices or use of AI in military, I would say semiconductors falls central in this setup picturization provided by you, because AI and semiconductors plays a very important role in China's re-energized military civil fusion strategy. wherein the use of high-end semiconductors is used to charge China's C4SIR capabilities and to aid its military modernization program. Yes, that should see a jump if China is able to augment its current capabilities in the semiconductor supply chain. If it is able to manage building its own devices entirely, what is it says indigenization of supply chains, which I guess is not possible in the near term because supply chain remains entirely fragmented, and it's not that you can build it in a few years. It takes generations for companies to come up and then acquire capabilities in different segments. As we have seen, it's very wide and complicated. So yeah, that may be a long-term debate to ponder thoughts on further, but yeah, I believe that it definitely figures out prominently in China's overall strategy of military modernization, and high-end chips lies at the center of it, that China is definitely aiming to develop its capabilities in.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Very interesting. Situation to observe. Yeah. Other questions or comments on the floor? Do you have any final remark, and also in terms of India's situation here? What do you think?
I think it is interesting time for India, not only as an observer in this ongoing churning or reshaping of the global supply chain, but it looks to it as an important opportunity for itself to gain capabilities in the semiconductor supply chain, especially in the post-COVID phase. This vulnerability has been exposed to the entire world, and there's a renewed motivation for governments to reshore semiconductor facilities in their own territory. And India is one of those actors which are looking at these challenges and trying to find an opportunity out of it. And we have more specialized policies in place now. There's this India Semiconductor Mission. There's performance-linked incentive schemes and other policies which are in place to make sure that India is able to attract more and more foreign investments in fabrication and ATP segments, especially. So yes, this is what India is expecting in to augment, build its capabilities in the semiconductor supply chain, which historically it has not been a major player in the global supply chain. So yes, it has to take advantage of the current capabilities of the players in the supply chain, be it the US and Taiwan. And as a result of it, its engagement with both countries are also deepening, especially Taiwan. India and Taipei are engaging with each other more deeply in recent years, especially in the chip sector. So this chip diplomacy is certainly is a new or added feature in India's and India-Taipei engagements. So yes, Taiwan is one of the most important actors that India is looking at, other than the US, which has top cloud and design companies which are important in the supply chain. So that is also India is looking at.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I think that we'll end our forum now for today, but we will have follow-up forums on different topics. So thank you, Mika. Let's keep in touch. All right.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Yeah. Bye-bye.